Доброго дня, шановні наші.
Hello, dear esteemed guests, the journalists and the watchers of Ukraine in the Media Center. I suggest we go on. Give the floor to the moderator of the event, Jael Mormad, the coordinator for the commission. You're on.
Yeah, okay, good. Good morning and good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. I want to welcome you to the press conference by the UN Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine. The members of the commissions are here to provide you with their preliminary observations on their week-long visit. Our press conference takes place in a hybrid format. In addition to the journalists present in the room, journalists join us online. The press conference can also be followed in live stream on the YouTube channel of the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. Questions will be asked from the floor, and online interpretation is available for those in the room, while online journalists will have English only. When asking questions, journalists will be asked to introduce themselves and indicate the media they work for. This press conference will last about 45 minutes. The statement of the commissioners will be available on the Commission's website later today, in English first and then in Ukrainian and Russian languages. Now I'm handing over to the commissioners. Please, Mr. Chair, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the United Nations Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine, composed of Erik Møse, Jasminka, Dzumhur, and Pablo de Greiff, I want to welcome you to this press conference. Since our first visit to Kyiv by the three commissioners in June this year, our investigations have carried out several visits, and we have had several visits in Ukraine. And this visit is the 10th mission of the Commission. In conformity with the Commission's mandate from March this year, we have provided an oral update to the Human Rights Council on the 23rd of September 2022, and we have submitted a written report to the General Assembly on 18 October this year. It contained our findings concerning events during late February and March 2022 in the four regions of Kyiv, Chernihiv, Kharkiv, and Sumy, as requested by the Human Rights Council. And as you will know, the Commission found that war crimes had been committed in those four areas. Since then, the Commission has devoted more of its attention to the broader temporal, geographical, and thematic framework set out in its mandate. Investigations are ongoing, and we are now preparing the Commission's comprehensive report, which will be submitted to the Human Rights Council in March next year. This week, we have had meetings with different stakeholders in Kyiv, including the Supreme Court of Ukraine, the Prosecutor General, the Ukrainian Parliament Commissioner for Human Rights, the Minister of Health, the Ministry for the Integration of the Temporarily Occupied Territories, the Ministry of Education, and several other ministries, government institutions, and non-governmental organizations. This week also included meetings with diplomatic representations. And in Odessa, on our way to Kyiv, the Commissioner met with Deputy Prosecutor of Kherson and internally displaced persons.
Dear journalists, thank you so much for your attention on this very important issue and particularly on work of the Commission. During this visit, the Commission devoted significant attention to the issue of destruction of civilian infrastructure of the country, particularly the destruction of its energy and transport grids. Both are preconditions for accessing rights, and civilian infrastructure is protected by international humanitarian law. The Commission intends to examine this issue in detail and will return to it in its report to the Human Rights Council next March session. The Commission expressed concern particularly about the devastating situation which continues to affect children's rights and lives. The spectrum of the endangered rights is constantly multiplying. In addition to documented cases of violations to the personal integrity of children, mothers whom we met told us that children are facing challenges accessing education. Destroyed and demolished schools in many cases, especially in the zone of military operations, prevent physical access to education. Furthermore, the online education system established during the COVID-19 pandemic continued to be used as one of education models during the armed conflict. However, attacks on the energy system compromises this model's effectiveness. Ensuring access to the education for children in the occupied regions, such as Kharkiv and Kherson, is a particular challenge. Destruction and devastation of medical institutions by attacks prevents people to access health protection. Additionally, attacks on transport and energy infrastructure limit mobility of patients and indirectly reduces enjoyment of the right to health. Patients with chronic conditions and those who have need for urgent medical treatment are particularly affected by this situation.
Thank you very much. Like my colleagues, I would like to express gratitude for your interest in listening to us. The Commission has long insisted that it would take a victim-centered approach to its work, and that this covers accountability in broad terms, including criminal justice, victims' rights to truth and reparations, as well as guarantees of non-repetition. This is the notion of accountability contained in existing international legal instruments. Exchanges with the stakeholders this week confirms the importance of this multidimensional conception of accountability. The right to truth, in the sense of full accounts of what happened to individual victims, or a more comprehensive account of the conflict, will require proper truth-gathering strategies and structures that may come later. In conflict situations, it is not uncommon to begin the process by the recovery of remains and by information about missing persons. In most interstate conflict, reparations is often understood in terms mainly of reconstruction. And there is, of course, a lot of reconstruction to be done in Ukraine. But reparations goes well beyond reconstruction. The establishment of a comprehensive reparations program is a long-term process which calls for consultations with those most affected. While its final design and implementation will take time, there are some immediate steps that can be taken by the Ukrainian government without exempting the Russian Federation from its responsibility. Victims have needs that require immediate attention. To this end, the establishment of a victims registry or a victim-friendly functional equivalent will facilitate access to support services, for example, mental health and psychosocial support to those exposed to violence, including displaced persons. Consistent with our mandate, we will continue to investigate violations of international human rights law, international humanitarian law, and related crimes, and where possible, seek to identify those responsible. National and international efforts being carried out in Ukraine for this purpose are well known. The Commission continues to try to contribute to those manifold initiatives. It is important to note that the achievement of criminal justice in circumstances of conflict is a resource-intensive and time-consuming exercise. In its comprehensive report in March 2023, the Commission will also make recommendations concerning the various possible mechanisms of accountability. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now we'll start taking questions from the floor. If there are any requests from the floor. Don't forget to identify yourself and the media you work for.
So, dear journalists, we are round of questions from the floor, right? And whom to?
If okay.
Yeah, Robert Kemper, German TV, ARD. You mentioned in your first statement it's now the 10th visit of the Commission in Ukraine, and you investigated here a lot. Could you please maybe summarize again, in general, what are the key findings of your Commission in the last couple of months that you're working here in the country?
We have had 10 missions in total. Most of them have been in Ukraine. 2 of them have been by commissioners, the others by investigators. Of those in Ukraine, we reached the results that are summarized in our General Assembly report of October this year. That means that we found war crimes with respect to personal integrity violations, explosive weapons, detention, sexual violations, just to mention most of them. This is rather detailed, reported on in our report, which is on our website on the 18th of October. Of course, the report of October was based on our investigations until that time, until early October. And since then, as I mentioned, the investigations have continued. Our investigators are on the ground, have been on the ground on several occasions since then, also elsewhere. And this process will continue until we have to close it in order to finalize our report. The findings in the October report referred, as I mentioned, to these 4 areas, but we have broadened the investigations, and the investigators are, and our intention is, broader now in all ways.
Thank you. We'll take another question from the floor, if there is any. If not, we'll go to... Okay. Thanks.
Nick Connolly, Deutsche Welle. I would like to ask you, have the investigations carried out by the Ukrainians on the ground, are they meeting international standards of best practice? And will the evidence gathering be of a certain level to then, in future maybe be used as evidence in international war crimes investigations and court cases?
want to take it.
So of course, we are in a very good position to talk about our own investigations. There is a great deal of talk, as I'm sure that you are familiar with, about the notion of coordination, which involves also discussions about using common standards for evidence gathering and the accumulation and treatment of evidence. I don't think we try to make a contribution to those coordination efforts. I don't think that we are in a position to qualify the investigative work of others, other than to say that we participate in active discussions about efforts to standardize procedures, to achieve effective information sharing whenever it is appropriate, to avoid the re-traumatization of victims by the double or triple interviewing of the same victims. So in a very crowded accountability space in which there is a great deal of goodwill and people want to make a contribution to the cause of accountability, I think that we are trying to do our part to make sure that the evidence that is gathered, generally speaking, will be useful for accountability purposes, and to guarantee that the evidence that we gather is, of course, one that meets all the relevant standards.
Just to clarify, you're getting to people once they've already been interviewed. Usually, you're getting to people, to victims once they've already been interviewed by the Ukrainian authorities. So this is kind of you're there, kind of sometime after the initial. Or are there cases where your teams, your investigators, are the first people on the ground?
Sometimes not. And the point is that we are trying to follow the best methodology possible and to avoid the problems that I mentioned before. So we do our best to rely on first sources, on interviews from victims and direct witnesses. And of course, we have very careful protocols for the conduct of those interviews as well. So I have no doubt about the thoroughness of our work, and we have plenty of evidence of the efforts that are being made by others in order to try to guarantee that the work that they do also meets international standards. But again, I don't think that it is our role to qualify the work of others.
Thank you. We will take another question from the floor, and then we have journalists online also asking. So I think the gentleman.
Jamie, Associated Press. There's been talk of the creation of a special tribunal, particularly European Union. I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on that. Are you open to all forms of possible accountability? Would you be able to take a position on that idea, please?
As we said, accountability for us is important, but as commissioners, we're trying to address issue how is important to make comprehensive approach to accountability issue, because too much focus only on criminal accountability will create opportunity that victims will not achieve full satisfaction. And therefore, when we are speaking on accountability, coordination and particularly communication and consultation process must be ensured, and particularly when we are speaking on the way how criminal accountability mechanism will be established. There are discussions on different models, but on the end, it is very important that the final decision will be adopted based on a very, very broad consultations, taking in account victims-oriented approach, taking in account other types of accountability.
Can I just follow up on that? You said, if I understood you correctly, you said that that too much of a focus on criminality could have an impact on the ability, accountability, and the redress that victims may have. Could you explain what that means exactly? I mean, should people not be focusing on the criminality?
No. Opposite of that. Justice. When we are speaking on transitional justice approach, there are four components which must be implemented at the same time. Because therefore, named transitional justice is exactly related to extraordinary situation can happen in one society. War, conflict is such extraordinary situation which requires additional resources from the state and other actors to impose to address all consequences of the war. Those four mechanisms are truth when we are speaking, example, on missing persons for relatives of missing persons, truth on their missing fathers, sons, and so on is most important. And after that, we are coming on second mechanism, transition justice mechanism is justice, criminal justice, but after that we are coming with issue of reparation to victims. We should not forget in criminal justice, crucial role so often as evidences have victims, and if you don't provide immediately proper support to victims, example, creating a registry of victims and including also witnesses, it reduces later the ability to provide evidences in a criminal justice system. Therefore, we are saying that when we are speaking on different types of accountabilities, they must be put at the same time, and equal treatment must be, attention should be provided for all of them.
And if I may, let me just add that, of course, the criminal aspect.
Please put on your microphone.
I think I pushed it. I agree with what was said, and it follows, of course, directly from the mandate of the Commission that the criminal side of accountability is something that the Commission shall focus on in its work and submit proposals on the various ways, including the different proposals that are launched and will probably be launched until March next year. So we are following a many-faceted approach in our work.
Yeah. And just to add one more point, the days in which a competition between different accountability measures was thought of is long gone. I think that now the idea is to think about the complementary relationships between criminal justice and other forms of accountability. And the Commission's position is that criminal justice is a crucial element of accountability, and not but that, and so are other forms of accountability that we would like to promote at the same time.
Thank you very much. I'll give the opportunity now for journalists online to raise some questions. We will come back to the floor. I now give the floor to Mr. Yuri Aprelev from RIA Novosti, please.
Hello? Yes. Yeah, okay. Thank you for the briefing. My question is about, have you discussed the execution of a dozen Russian prisoners of war with the Ukrainian side? Has an investigation been opened into this case, and are you going to investigate it yourself?
Repeat the question.
Yes, I'm sorry, which particular case were you referring to?
I'm referring about Makiivka. Volver-Turk told that the video is highly likely real, and I'm speaking about it.
Are you referring to the episode with the video?
Please speak to the microphone.
Are you referring to the video event?
Yes, to the video events.
Yes. All right. We are, of course, aware of that event. It has been widely published. Needless to say, that is now being investigated by the Commission, both the video itself, its quality, authenticity, as well as other elements in order to get deeper into that matter. So that is under investigation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'll give the floor to Mrs. Emma Farge from Reuters.
Good afternoon. A question for Commissioner Møse, please. Is it possible to give an overview of the new evidence of war crimes since your report to the General Assembly? And on violations of international humanitarian law, have you looked into the treatment of the dead in this conflict? There were some horrific allegations coming out of Kherson about Russia burning their own soldiers in landfill. Are you looking into this issue, and can you comment on it? And just a final clarification, I didn't fully understand the response about whether or not the COI would be submitting evidence to the EU-backed Tribunal on Crimes of Aggression. Can I just get a clear answer on that? Thanks very much.
Let me start with two of the issues. The first one being whether there is new evidence since we provided our report to the General Assembly. The Commission has, of course, gathered new evidence. It's now being considered, assessed with other kinds of evidence. This is a complicated and thorough process. It's not a long time since the 18th of October, so that process is ongoing, and we cannot point to particular incidents or conclusive remarks at this stage. When it comes to the issue of the Tribunal on Aggression, let me say that we are aware of that proposal. That is one of the possible alternatives of the international accountability measures that may be proposed as one of our recommendations, but we have not concluded yet. There are so many possible ways to approach these accountability issues, both internationally and nationally, and we will conclude in a clear way in March. So these were two of the questions.
Thank you very much. Now we can go back to the floor.
Sorry, can I just follow up, because there was a third one on the treatment of the dead, please. Are you looking into that, and do you think violations have been committed here?
Thank you very much. To be honest, I cannot tell you specifically right now that we are looking into this topic. The mandate of the Commission is certainly broad. As the chair just mentioned, it has been a short time since October until now. The type of behavior that you mentioned is one that would fall certainly under our mandate, and therefore I think that it may very well be the subject of our work and our investigation. But up to now, up to this point, I cannot tell you that this has become the specific subject of our work since October.
Thank you. There is no follow-up question, Mrs. Farge?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'll go back to the floor. If there are, I think that one gentleman was looking for the floor, no? No? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm about a question of effectiveness of Commission work. Could you say, approximately a ratio between the number of cases of violation of human rights and a number of persons or other bodies pretty punished for their behavior. Thank you.
To be honest, there are different statistics available related to both elements which you raised, related to number of cases and number of those who have been already punished for crime made. Therefore, we are insisting how it's important to be established a strategy for prosecution of war crime cases, and also to establish a better coordination among different actors responsible for prosecution those cases. That's what we already present in our report to General Assembly, and generally what we are using as is only cases which we have fully investigated.
Is there any question from the floor? If not, I have another one online. No one from the floor. So, Mr. Antonio Broto from AFA, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I would like to ask for some personal points of view on your investigations. For example, when you talk about war crimes, which ones have you shocked the most when you have been able to know them? And have you seen similar patterns of these crimes in previous conflicts that you investigated in the past? Thank you.
Yes, okay. Please.
You are raising an interesting question, but one that has to do with subjective reactions to events. And I am sure that given the extensive experience that each of us has had in different contexts, we would be able to point out events that are particularly shocking in each of the conflicts where we have worked. But making a comparison between them is particularly difficult. Again, from a purely subjective and personal standpoint, I think that, for example, the magnitude of destruction that is involved in a conflict in which the choice of arms is not small firearms, but rather high explosives and missiles, and there is something shocking about that. But this is my personal reaction, and it's my response to a question that I want to emphasize has to do with our personal reactions to things. And I am sure that there is no uniform answer to your question.
I would...
Microphone, please.
And I would agree with that. And how would you, in a way, compare, on the one hand, these large-scale technical violations, and on the other hand, the kind of hand-weaponed machetes violations at short distance, where neighbor kills neighbor? I think that is a very complicated field to enter into, to compare human suffering and human evil.
As my colleague said, we have experienced different and there are always crime and violations against personal integrity, including children, including sexual violence, killings, have particular intensive effects when you are investigating that, listening stories and truths, because in some way it connects with human beings, and we are speaking on human rights. But on the other side, what is here visible is exactly a type of guns, weapons which have been used, and dimension of distortion because exactly on type of used weapons. And last thing is objects which are targeted, particularly in wintertime now since October, energy sector, transport sector, and so on, which prevent a big number of population and people to enjoyment of human rights. I'm saying that based on my experience from Balkans, and I know how people suffered without electricity, water, and heating system.
Thank you very much. I think, is there another question from the floor? So I think that Mrs. Farge, you want to add another question?
Thanks a lot. Actually, it was just picking up on what the Commissioner just said about the power cuts, which was the reason this press conference was delayed, I believe. How are you looking at the power cuts in the context of potential war crimes? How are these attacks on critical infrastructure being treated? And do you have any hope that there will be prosecution for this? And is there a history of success in this field?
Your question partly raises the issue of our investigations into this. Needless to say, we are following this closely. These events have devastating consequences for a large number of people. Winter is approaching, it's already cold. It goes without saying that this is something we are looking into. I note that we have had meetings, for instance, with Ministry of Relevance in this field during this week's visit. Could you take over the second one?
Yes, and we emphasize in the statement, as you may have realized, that we think that the attacks on the infrastructure have an impact on the access to rights that are fundamental for large portions of the population. Jasminka, for example, mentioned the consequences that the attacks on infrastructure have on the right to health, but also on the right to education of children. And this is just the beginning. So this is a very, very serious question for us. On the success of prosecutions for attacks on infrastructure, I think that this is a complicated question. Our intention, in full consistency with the mandate, is to make contributions to accountability for violations of international humanitarian law. International humanitarian law has provisions to protect civilian infrastructure. Part of the analysis that we are engaged in at present and that we will continue to engage in the coming weeks is whether these attacks constitute war crimes, and if they do, what we can do in order to make a contribution to the accountability for such crimes. But of course, this is an issue that we are working on intensively and very seriously.
Thank you. I think I see again. Do you want to raise a question, Mr. Proto?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I would like to know if you had any obstacles to access particular regions of Ukraine or to reach particular victims. Thank you.
I think we all need that questions repeated. Will you please do that? The connection is not top quality.
Yes, if you had obstacles in accessing particular geographic areas of Ukraine during the investigation and also particular groups of victims. Thank you.
The answer to that is yes. We have problems in accessing the occupied territories. We have contacted the authorities of those territories and are continuing our efforts to establish communication with them. As long as we do not have access to those territories, we have to collect evidence in other ways, not by visiting there.
It is very important to say that we are also trying to establish contact with Russian Federation through several times and without successful results, and we hope that that cooperation will be established, but related to access to temporary occupied territories, there is no any possibility in this stage, and therefore collection of evidence is very difficult, and we are trying to do that through interview with victims and witnesses, and therefore this visit included visit to Odessa. We were able to speak with witnesses from Kherson region. But when we are speaking also on victims of sexual violence, it is an additional problem because of still present very high stigmatization of such act, lack of readiness of victims to speak publicly on that what they passed, and definitely displacement of people, not only internally into Ukraine but also abroad, makes difficult our work.
Thank you. I think we have no other questions from the floor or online, so I think we will close here the press conference. I recall that the statement will be available on the website of the Commission and in all languages by the end of the day. Thank you very much for your attention and for attending this press conference, and sorry for the delay. Thanks.